India is drifting ever closer toward China. Once one of the United States' main allies in Asia and a serious counterbalance to Beijing, it is gradually moving away from that role. And in light of recent events, this looks less like a tactical shift and more like a strategic turn. As analysts from the Observer Research Foundation and other think tanks note, New Delhi is now actively expanding cooperation with Beijing, restoring air links, strengthening trade exchanges, and lobbying Chinese interests through various formats, including BRICS. Just a few years ago, the situation looked entirely different. Against the backdrop of border clashes, including flare-ups along the line of actual control with China, relations between India and China were tense and unstable. At that time, India was viewed as one of America's key partners in Asia, a component of the regional counterbalance. But everything changed with Donald Trump's return to the White House and the sharp escalation of U.S. tariff and sanctions policies. The roots of this shift lie not only in Chinese diplomacy, but also in how India felt under growing pressure from the United States. According to insiders, when Washington began imposing new tariffs, sanctions, and direct economic pressure, Delhi perceived it as a signal. Our ally is not protecting us, it is squeezing us. A study by Modern Diplomacy directly states that India-US relations are experiencing an unprecedented crisis in 2025. To begin with, the Trump administration and its allies introduced high tariffs on Indian exports and openly expressed outrage that India continued to purchase Russian oil, even as Moscow faced Western sanctions. India, for its part, emphasized that its energy security is a vital priority and that its population of 1,400,000,000 people cannot be left without affordable oil. Analysts note that this feeling of pressure without partnership became the turning point. As outlined in the paper, at the crossroads, India's relations with the US, China, and Russia, the divergence from Washington and the sense that India was being forced to seek new alignments became the key drivers of its subsequent rapprochement with China. The next stage was the tangible warming of ties between India and China. According to China Briefing, in 2025, Beijing and New Delhi began what was described as a cautious but substantial reset in relations. On August 31, 2025, during the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in Tianjin, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi met with Chinese leader Xi Jinping, his first visit to China in 7 years. Around the same time, China lifted export restrictions on critical goods such as rare earth magnets and tunnel construction equipment for India, which analysts interpreted as a gesture of trust and an intent to foster not only strategic but also economic cooperation. Air travel was restored, cultural exchanges expanded, trade revived. All these steps were officially framed as recognition of a new trajectory. Of course, fundamental strategic disagreements between India and China remain, including border disputes, China's growing influence in the Indian Ocean, and major infrastructure projects like the Belt and Road Initiative. Yet the overall picture is clear. India is not merely stepping away from the United States. It is increasingly embracing a multi-alignment strategy in which China and Russia are no longer just neighbors, but active geopolitical partners. Experts emphasize that this is not an alliance in the traditional sense, but India's rapid pivot eastward is unmistakable. From Washington's perspective, as highlighted in Australian Outlook's article, US-India Relationship on Brink of Breakdown, the situation has reached a critical point. The United States now sees India not as a reliable ally, but as a free actor unwilling to bow to pressure. And, according to the authors, Trump has grown tired of being the balancer at his own expense. The fact that India not only refused to comply with US demands but also deepened its engagement with China and Russia has become a striking signal. Le Monde writes that the alliance between the United States and India, once seen as the cornerstone of the West's Asian strategy, is now undermined by tariffs, oil, and relations with Pakistan. Washington has been actively supporting Pakistan, offering it trade incentives, and New Delhi sees this as a serious diplomatic mistake. According to insiders, if Trump had approached Modi more diplomatically, in a friendly, pressure-free manner, asking him to reduce Russian oil purchases and make certain concessions, Modi might have been willing to take a step back to preserve relations with the United States. But Trump chose the path of hard pressure through tariffs and sanctions, and that deeply offended India. The sources are unnamed, described only as people close to the government in New Delhi. As Modern Diplomacy notes, Delhi feels abandoned. Now, American diplomats will have to carry out a monumental effort to rebuild trust and restore India's sense of partnership rather than coercion. Analysts believe it is only a matter of time to see whether Washington can rewrite the script or whether India's ambitions have already cooled. So what exactly does this drift toward China mean? It does not mean that India is becoming Beijing's vassal. Far from it. It means that India is choosing greater freedom and balance. Several key elements stand out: growing trade and investment between China and India. According to China Briefing, in 2025, China and India view each other not as rivals, but as partners in development, strengthening economic interdependence, reflected in China's lifting of export restrictions and India's renewed interest in Chinese investments and markets. India is rethinking its position. While competition with China continues, particularly over the border and in the Indian Ocean, New Delhi is taking steps to reduce tensions and maximize its strategic autonomy. And at the same time, the United States is seen in New Delhi not as a reliable partner, but as a player prone to coercion. And India is unwilling to be merely a secondary link in the American strategic chain. The consequences of this shift are enormous. If India decisively moves closer to China, the balance of power in Asia will change dramatically. The United States will lose one of its key pillars of influence in the region, a partner that once served as a counterweight to China. And China will gain not only a neighboring partner, but also a geopolitical compensation for the pressure it faces from the West. In a private think tank discussion, a source said that both Delhi and Beijing see a window opening. China can offer markets and technology. India can offer its population of 1,400,000,000 and its vast consumer market. Together, they can create an alternative to the Western chain of values and alliances. Although the source remains unnamed for ethical reasons, this message is quietly circulating in diplomatic circles. What does this mean for the United States? According to The Guardian's analysis of the Trump-Xi meeting, Washington has realized that the former bullies can now be bullied. While most attention has focused on US-China relations, the India question has lingered in the background, but it is now moving to center stage. And here lies the key point. India is not simply distancing itself from the United States. It is asserting its own foreign policy autonomy. The traditional formula, "we are America's ally against China," sounds increasingly outdated in New Delhi. As analysts write, India looks out for itself above all. If the United States wants to regain India's trust, it must offer partnership instead of pressure, compromise instead of ultimatum. And according to insiders, the first move must come from Washington. Otherwise, India will drift permanently into the eastern sphere of influence, or emerge as an independent pole that no longer needs American approval. Developing this further, why might India choose China? Because alternatives exist. China offers markets, infrastructure, technology, and support, while America, despite its declared friendship, increasingly acts from a position of dominance. One could say that India stands at a crossroads, and the choice it is making is reshaping Asia's geopolitical architecture. In the foreseeable future, Washington will have to either adapt to India's new political course or find itself out of the game when it comes to influence in South and Central Asia.